Nearly 20 years ago, the Concorde crash on a hotel in Val d'Oise killed 113 people. One of the survivors, the owner of the establishment, received us at her home. She now lives in New Caledonia and has never forgotten this legendary plane that in 24 years had carved out a reputation for being the safest in the world. The report by Marine Revaillac, Melchior Inzi and Pauline Bensassi.
It was nicknamed the White Bird.
We are dealing with an extraordinary plane which is revolutionary, which is the only civil aircraft capable of flying beyond the speed of sound. It was a
legendary plane. It was beautiful. It represented speed. It represented France. Everyone knew the Concorde.
And then there was this absolute tragedy.
A tragedy that unfolded in 1 minute and 28 seconds. On July 25th, 2,000 boarding for Air France flight 4,990 to New York started at 3:30 p.m., an hour later than scheduled. On board, there are 100 passengers, mostly Germans, and 9 crew members, all French.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm your captain. Welcome aboard the Concorde, and I apologize for the significant delay.
At 4:34 p.m., the aircraft moves to runway 26 at Roissy-Charles de Gaulle. An Air France 747 and a Continental Airlines DC-10 take off before it. 8 minutes later, at 4:42 p.m., the Concorde begins its takeoff. In 9 seconds, it reaches 115 miles per hour. That's when an unimaginable chain reaction begins.
The wheel will burst, break apart, and project a piece weighing over 8.8 pounds.
Is going to take off at about 186 miles per hour, hitting the underside of the wing, inside which there is the tank. Under pressure, the tank cracks at the back.
And
the fuel will flow freely, setting fire like a blowtorch behind that famous flame that was more than 262 feet long.
But in the cockpit, while the pilots certainly felt a jolt, they haven't noticed the fire yet. They received the information via radio.
The controller from Charles de Gaulle tells them, you have a large flame behind Concorde, you have a large flame behind. That's how they find out.
And then, it's impossible to brake. The plane has already passed the famous point V1, also called the point of no return. They are already at a speed at which they must take off, because if a plane has already exceeded a certain speed, it can't necessarily have the space to brake in front of it.
The Concorde takes off with 2 malfunctioning engines, and then a new problem arises.
These pilots can no longer retract the landing gear when they need to glide. When we want to glide, we try to retract anything that can slow us down, including the landing gear.
Eventually, adding more of the same thing stops working.
The pilots, however, attempt one last measure, desperate. The plane doesn't have enough power to return to Charles de Gaulle, so they aim for Le Bourget Airport, 3.1 miles from there. At the same moment, Michel Frichtot, 46 years old at the time, has no idea what is happening above his head. Owner of a hotel in Gonesse, the Concorde is one of the attractions of his establishment. She and her staff get ready for new clients arriving in an hour. She then listens carefully and looks at her watch.
At 4:44 p.m., I mentioned the Concorde was making an odd noise. In addition, this isn't normal. What's going on?
88 seconds after takeoff, the Concorde crashes into Michel Frichtot's hotel.
Our entire beautiful room, everything around it, it all started to shatter. There was smoke. I didn't know what was happening. I not made a connection between the Concorde and what was happening in the hotel.
The force of the impact is compounded by the fury of the fire. The roughly 95 tons of fuel contained in the plane ignite.
I took a tongue of fire to the face. My hair burned, my arms burned, my head burned. I didn't realize anything. It came after the pain? Well, after. It feels like you're beside yourself. And then if you want, it's the madness that makes you move forward.
Michel, burned to the 2nd and 3rd degree, manages to get out with his young apprentice and the only customer present at the hotel at the time of the crash.
I had not understood. There had already been help everywhere. For me, in my head, it had been 3 minutes, 4 minutes, but there was help everywhere.
Immediately, firefighters, police, and rescuers realized that aboard the Concorde, no one has survived. 4 women, aged 18 to 41 employees of the hotel, were also killed. 113 deaths according to the Investigation and Analysis Office due to a tiny piece of metal that fell on the runway. See.
It's an American airline plane that loses a slat about 50 centimeters long. And so this excessively rigid metal will end up on the runway. And when the Concorde takes off, it will roll over it and then it will damage its tire.
The deceased from Continental Airlines, the one who took off 5 minutes before the Concorde, would therefore be the cause of the crash. A theory contested by the American company. A legal battle then begins that will last 12 years and ends in criminal appeal with the acquittal of all the accused, including the technician who had improperly fixed the strip.
Is it the strip or is it the tire? Most people are now convinced that it's the strip.
It's
not that obvious.
4 months after the accident, Michelle Frischto moved to New Caledonia with her family. She suffered from the aftermath for a long time.
I could no longer hear the planes. For a time, it was impossible. I could no longer hear a plane overhead.
At the end of the world, she opened a restaurant, then resumed her studies. Today, she's a lawyer. Finally.
Human beings have a terrible resource, being able to get out of all this.
The crash of July 25th, 2000 marked the premature end of the Concorde. This myth, with its fragile tires, landed for the last time in 2003. Amidst applause.